She was the most powerful woman in the room, until the lights went out and the guns came out. Sienna Whitmore built a billion-dollar empire from scratch, survived boardrooms full of sharks, and never flinched once. But tonight, trapped in a dark parking garage with armed men blocking every exit, her life depended entirely on one person. A quiet driver she'd hired 3 days ago, a man she barely knew, a man everyone had already written off. What happened next? Nobody saw coming. If this story has you hooked already, hit that like button and drop the name of your city in the comments. I want to see just how far this story travels. The board meeting ran 47 minutes past schedule, which meant Sienna Whitmore didn't get out of the 42nd floor conference room until 11:14 at night. She knew the exact time because she checked her watch twice. Once when Marcus Hale, her VP of Operations, started his third redundant PowerPoint slide about projected Q4 losses, and once when she finally said, out loud, in front of 12 senior executives, "Marcus, wrap it up. We've been over these numbers. Nothing you're showing us changes the decision we already made 2 hours ago." The room went quiet in that particular way rooms go quiet when a CEO says something everyone was thinking and nobody else had the nerve to say. Marcus clicked off his slide. Someone coughed. The meeting ended. Sienna gathered her folio and her phone without looking at anyone, nodded once to her assistant Priya, who was waiting near the door with her coat and laptop bag, and walked out. She was tired in the specific way that had nothing to do with sleep. She'd been tired like this for months. A flat, hollow exhaustion that lived somewhere behind her sternum and didn't respond to coffee or rest or exercise. Running Whitmore Global at 30 required a particular kind of constant performance, the kind where you couldn't afford to look uncertain even when you were, couldn't afford to hesitate even when every instinct told you to slow down. The company had been her father's. She'd taken the reins at 26 after he had his first stroke, and she'd grown it from a mid-sized logistics firm into a billion-dollar supply chain enterprise in 4 years. People called her relentless. They meant it as a compliment. Most days it didn't feel like one. "Car's downstairs," Priya said, falling into step beside her. "Nathan confirmed he's in the garage, Bay 12. "Good. You want me to come up tomorrow at 7 or 8? "7. Sienna hit the elevator button. "I need the Harrington contracts reviewed before the 9 o'clock. Priya made a note without being asked. She was 24 and frightfully competent, which was the only reason Sienna had kept her through 3 rounds of executive restructuring. "Also, your regular driver, Daniel, the agency says his daughter's surgery went well. He should be back Monday. Send flowers, something real, not the corporate arrangement." The elevator arrived. "And tell the agency Nathan Cole did fine this week. He was professional." That was high praise from Sienna, and Priya knew it. She said goodnight and peeled off toward the other elevator bank as Sienna stepped inside and rode down alone. Nathan Cole had been in Bay 12 since 10:40. He'd moved the black company sedan into position facing the exit ramp, force of habit, always park facing out, and then sat with the engine off, reading on his phone. Not news. He didn't read news at night anymore. It messed with his sleep, and he needed what little of it he got. He was reading a chapter book about a kid who discovers his grandmother is secretly a retired spy because his daughter Maya had asked him to read it so they could talk about it over breakfast. Maya was 8, and she read the way some kids played video games, constantly, hungrily, finishing a book in 2 days and immediately starting another. Nathan couldn't always keep up. He tried. He'd been doing this job, driving executives and corporate clients for a staffing agency, for about 14 months. Before that, 2 years doing private security consulting, mostly dull stuff, corporate travel escorts and venue sweeps for mid-level executives who thought they needed more protection than they actually did. Before that, 8 years in the Navy. Before that didn't count. The driving work suited him. Quiet, contained, no surprises. You showed up, you drove, you waited, you drove again. The clients were mostly in their own worlds, calls, emails, prep work, and they didn't require conversation or performance from him. He was a professional set of hands on a wheel. That was fine. He'd had enough years of being something else. His phone said it was 11:09 when he got Priya's text, "Coming down, 5 minutes." He set the book down, started the car, and adjusted the mirrors out of habit even though he'd already adjusted them when he parked. He was thinking about whether Maya would want pancakes or eggs tomorrow morning. She'd been going through a pancake phase, blueberry specifically, but last Tuesday she'd announced that blueberry was getting old and requested something savory when the first vehicle entered the garage. It was a white panel van, no markings. It came down the entry ramp slowly, which Nathan noticed because panel vans in corporate garages at 11 at night were unusual, and panel vans that came in slowly were more unusual than ones that came in at a normal speed. He watched it in his side mirror. It pulled into a bay near the bottom of the ramp and stopped. Nobody got out. Nathan adjusted his mirror fraction and watched without appearing to watch, which was a skill that took years and a particular set of circumstances to develop. A second vehicle entered the garage. Black SUV, tinted windows. It parked perpendicular to the exit ramp, blocking it partially, in a way that looked casual but wasn't. You could park like that by accident. You could also park like that on purpose. Nathan's red was on purpose, but he sat with it. His phone was in his hand. He typed a text to Priya. "Is Ms. Whitmore still upstairs? Can you delay 2 minutes?" He sent it and watched. The van was still closed. The SUV hadn't moved. A man in a gray jacket was standing near the stairwell door, trying to look like he was on his phone. He wasn't looking at his phone. He was watching the elevator bank. 3 seconds after Nathan sent the text, the garage's stairwell door on the far side opened and Sienna Whitmore walked in with her laptop bag and her coat over her arm, and the particular purposeful stride of someone who'd been in meetings too long and wanted to be home. She was looking down at her own phone as she walked. Nathan's text hadn't reached Priya in time, or Priya hadn't seen it, or Sienna had taken the stairs instead of waiting for the elevator. He didn't know which. It didn't matter. He was already opening his door. Honk. Sienna saw the black sedan in Bay 12 and angled toward it without looking up. She was composing a text to her general counsel about the Harrington contracts, 2 sentences of legal shorthand that required just enough concentration to keep her eyes on the screen. She heard the driver's door open, Nathan getting out to take her bag, the routine, and she was 6 steps from the car when she heard the van door slide open. Not one person. 3. She looked up. 3 men in dark clothing came out of the van quickly and without urgency, the way trained people move when they've rehearsed a thing enough times that it doesn't feel rushed, even when it is. The man near the stairwell moved away from the wall. The SUV doors opened. 2 more. 5 total. Her brain processed this in about a second and a half and arrived immediately at the conclusion that this was not random. Ms. Whitmore. The man who spoke was the one who'd been near the stairwell. Early 40s, close-cropped hair, the kind of flat, unimpressed expression that belonged to people accustomed to other people being afraid of them. He had a gun in his right hand, held low, not raised yet, just present. "We're going to need a few minutes of your time." Her laptop bag was in her hand. Her phone was in her other hand. She thought, with a strange calm, "Priya is still upstairs. There's no one here." And then she thought, "Nathan is behind me." She turned her head a fraction. Nathan was standing just outside the driver's door. He hadn't moved toward her. He was watching the 5 men with an expression that Sienna couldn't fully read. Not frozen, not panicked, not even particularly alarmed. He was watching them the way a man watches weather move in, calculating. "What is this?" she said. Her voice came out steady, which surprised her. "This is a conversation," the man said. "About some documents. Shouldn't take long if you're cooperative." "I don't have conversations with people holding guns." He took 2 steps toward her. "Tonight, you do." One of the men from the van moved around the far side and approached from Sienna's left, cutting off any path toward the exit stairs. Another stationed himself near the elevator bank. They'd done this before. The positioning was clean, no wasted movement. The remaining 2 from the van and the SUV were hanging back near the vehicles, one of them holding what looked like a tablet, which was strange enough that Nathan's eye kept returning to it. The lead man stopped about 8 feet from Sienna and held up the gun properly now. Not pointed at her, still angled down but making its presence unambiguous. "There's a set of documents inside your building that need your signature tonight. Stock transfer authorization. If you come with us now and sign them, this ends quietly. Nobody gets hurt. Your driver goes home to his family." He said that last part while looking at Nathan. Nathan met his eyes and said nothing. I'm not signing anything, Sienna said. Ms. Whitmore, I don't know who hired you, but whoever it is has made a significant miscalculation. She could hear her own pulse in her ears, but her voice wasn't shaking, and she was genuinely surprised by that. You're standing inside a building with cameras on every level. The moment I don't check in with my assistant in, she glanced at her watch. 4 minutes, she calls building security and the police. The cameras in this garage have been offline for the last 22 minutes, the man said. Not bragging, just informing. And we'll be gone well before 4 minutes. The man on her left moved in and grabbed her wrist. Not hard, controlled, professional, the grip of someone who wanted compliance rather than injury. But it was a hand on her wrist, and something in Sienna went very still and very cold, and she pulled back and he held tighter, and she thought, this is actually happening. Let go of her. Nathan's voice. Quiet, not raised. The man holding her wrist glanced over his shoulder. Nathan had moved. Sienna hadn't heard him move, and he was now standing roughly 10 feet away, not rushing, not in any visible state of agitation. He'd taken off his jacket. He was holding it in his left hand. His right hand was open at his side. The lead man actually smiled a little. Sir? This doesn't involve you. Get back in your car. Let go of her arm, Nathan said again. Same tone, same volume. Friend. The lead man turned to face him properly. You're a driver. I don't know what you think you're going to do here, but I think you should let go of her arm, Nathan said, before this gets more complicated than it needs to be for both of us. There was something in the way he said it, not a threat exactly, more like a professional assessment shared with a colleague, that made the lead man pause. Just for a second. The smile didn't disappear, but it became more uncertain. The man holding Sienna's wrist didn't let go. What happened next happened fast. Nathan didn't telegraph it. That was the first thing Sienna would think about afterward. There was no change in posture, no visible prep, no moment where you could see him deciding. He just moved. He closed the 10 feet between himself and the man holding her wrist in less than 2 seconds, caught the man's elbow with one hand and his shoulder with the other, and used the man's own forward-leaning position against him in a controlled takedown that ended with the man face down on the concrete with Nathan's knee in the center of his back. The man made a short, surprised sound, not a yell, more like someone who'd expected to remain standing, and then went still because Nathan had his arm at an angle that made not being still a bad option. This took about 3 seconds from the time Nathan started moving. Hey! One of the van men started forward. Nathan looked up at him with the same expression he'd had watching the weather come in and said quietly, Don't. The man stopped. The lead man raised his gun. I'll shoot you, he said, and Sienna believed he meant it. Nathan looked at the gun. He looked at the man. He said, You'd rather shoot me in a building you told me has no working cameras. That's a new problem for you. And the moment you fire, every phone in the executive offices upstairs registers it and calls it in automatically. It's a feature in the security system most people don't know about. He paused. Also, you'd have to explain why your man is on the floor. He was, Sienna realized, negotiating. In the middle of a garage with a gun pointed at him, he was negotiating, calm and specific, the way you'd negotiate a contract term. The lead man's jaw tightened. He flicked his eyes at the 2 men near the vehicles. They started moving forward. Nathan released the man on the floor, not gently, but not brutally, and stood up and took 3 steps back toward Sienna. There's a maintenance corridor behind you, he said to her, low, not whispering, just quiet. Gray door to your left. Keep walking toward me and then go through it. They'll follow. Gray door. Go. She went. The door opened on a maintenance corridor that smelled like oil and recycled air and old concrete, lit by fluorescent lights that buzzed faintly at a frequency that made Sienna's teeth ache. Utility pipes ran along the ceiling. The floor was bare. She had no idea this corridor existed, and she'd been parking in this garage for 3 years. She pushed through, and Nathan came through 2 seconds behind her, pulling the door shut. She heard shouting from the garage, not panic, the organized kind, men calling positions to each other. She heard footsteps. Move, Nathan said. Where does this go? Loading dock level, if the building layout matches what I'm thinking. You know this building's layout? I looked it up when I started the assignment. He was already moving down the corridor, not running, but walking at a pace that required her to half jog to keep up. I look up every building before the first pickup. Exits, security positions, alternate routes, habit. She wanted to ask what kind of driver does that, but she was focused on keeping up and not turning her ankle on the uneven floor, so she filed it away. Behind them, the door opened. Nathan didn't look back. Left up here. They turned left into a narrower corridor, then right through a door marked electrical. No entry, that opened on a room full of humming equipment and cable bundles the size of her arm, then through a second door on the far side that opened on a stairwell she also didn't know existed. Down, he said. They went down one flight. The footsteps behind them were audible, but not close. Whoever was following knew the garage, but not this part of the building. The man with the tablet, Sienna said, because she'd been thinking about it since they ran. He had documents ready. This wasn't improvised. No, Nathan said. It wasn't. Someone told them about the board meeting tonight. Someone told them the timing, the garage, the camera systems. Someone told them about my regular driver being out. She heard her own voice arriving at a conclusion she wasn't ready for. This came from inside the company. Nathan said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. They reached the bottom of the stairwell. A door. He pushed it open slowly, checked the space beyond, and held it for her. Whoa. The loading dock was empty, lit by a single orange security lamp that threw long shadows across a concrete platform and two dormant forklifts. Crates were stacked along one wall. The bay doors were rolled down. A side exit was set into the far wall, a standard push-bar door. Sienna was breathing harder than the physical exertion warranted. Adrenaline had a way of burning up oxygen. We need to get to a phone or a secure line, she said. I need to call my general counsel, not through the building's internal system, and I need to get those documents before whoever hired these men does. Nathan was looking at the side exit, then back at the stairwell door they'd come through. Is there a security station on this level? There's one on the lobby level. I don't know about down here. If the cameras in the garage were offline, there's a reasonable chance the security desk was compromised too. He was speaking in a flat, practical way, processing out loud. You said something about a building security feature, so phones registering gunshots. I made that up. He looked at her. The bit about the automatic call-in. I made it up, she said. I was trying to buy us a few seconds. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, but something adjacent to one. Okay, that worked. He looked at the exit again. The side door comes out on the service alley between this building and the Harmon Tower. There are usually security staff at the Harmon Tower entrance all night. If we go that way, we can get to a phone and put some distance between us. I'm not leaving, Sienna said. He turned to look at her fully. Ms. Whitmore, I'm not leaving this building while there are men in my parking garage holding documents for me to sign. She said it evenly, but something underneath it was iron. If I walk out that door tonight without stopping this, by tomorrow morning they'll have used whatever legal maneuvering they've prepared to push through whatever takeover they've planned. And I'll be fighting it from the outside with no access to my own resources. I know how this works. She held his gaze. We're not leaving. Nathan looked at her for a moment. All right, he said. Then we need to know what they were carrying and who sent them. The man with the tablet. If we can get that, I know where he was standing. She blinked. You want to go back into the garage. I want to go back into the garage, he confirmed in the tone of a man who thought this was a reasonable thing to say. With 5 armed men. 3 now. 2 are in the corridor. He was already thinking through something. She could see it. And they're looking for us in the building, not back in the garage. The garage is the last place they'll expect us to go. This is insane, she said, without particular heat. It wasn't a protest exactly, more like an observation. Probably, Nathan said. Getting back to the garage required retracing through the electrical room and coming up through a different maintenance access point. A hatch in the floor of the garage's far corner that Nathan had spotted on the building diagram and that Sienna hadn't known existed. It opened between a support pillar and a utility cabinet, in a shadow that the remaining security lighting didn't quite reach. Nathan came up first and held the hatch for her, and they crouched together in the shadow while he surveyed the garage. The white van was still parked where it had been. The black SUV was still blocking the partial exit. One man was visible. The lead man, standing near the elevator bank, speaking on a phone, his back partially toward them. The man with the tablet was near the van. The other three were presumably still in the building looking for them. "The tablet," Sienna said. "Wait." The lead man finished his call and looked at his watch. He said something to the man with the tablet that Sienna couldn't hear, and the man with the tablet nodded and walked toward the stairwell, the same one they'd originally come through. Both remaining men were now moving away from the van. "Now," Nathan said. They moved quickly across the open garage floor, staying low, keeping the van between them and the two men for as long as possible. 20 feet. 15. Sienna's heels were too loud on the concrete, and she paused for 2 seconds to pull them off and carry them, which she'd never done in a parking garage at midnight before and which Nathan didn't comment on. The tablet had been set on the hood of the van. Sienna picked it up. It was not password protected, which told her it had been accessed recently and not locked. Someone had been using it when Nathan's intervention interrupted things. The screen showed a document interface. At the top of the open file were words she recognized immediately. Whitmore Global Holdings, Transfer of Operational Authority, Temporary Receivership Authorization. Below that, a set of signature blocks. Her name, notarized witness fields, and beneath the signature section a name she recognized, a name she'd known for 11 years. Marcus Hale. She stared at it. "We need to move," Nathan said, low and close to her shoulder. "Marcus." She said it like the name tasted wrong. "Marcus Hale. He's been my VP of operations for 4 years. She stopped. She thought about the board meeting that had run 47 minutes over. She thought about Marcus's third redundant PowerPoint slide. She thought about how he'd volunteered to handle the Q4 logistics review last week, which gave him access to the executive scheduling system, which included the car dispatch and driver assignments. She thought about how he'd asked, 2 days ago, a question that had seemed routine. "Is Daniel still out? Do we have coverage?" And she'd said yes without thinking about why he was asking. She thought about 12 years of building something and trusting people and the specific flatness in her sternum that had been there for months. And she wondered now whether some part of her had known, in the way you sometimes know things before you can prove them. "Sienna." Nathan's hand on her shoulder. Brief, just pressure. "We have to move right now." She locked the screen and tucked the tablet under her arm. "I know," she said. "I know. Let's go." They were 15 feet from the maintenance hatch when the stairwell door on the far end of the garage opened and one of the 3 men who'd gone into the building came out at a jog and looked up and saw them. For a split second, everyone was still. Then, "Here, they're in the garage." Nathan was already moving. He put himself between Sienna and the man and said to her without turning, "Hatch, go. Go now." She went. She dropped through the hatch feet first, which was ungraceful, and left her landing hard on one knee on the concrete below. And she heard above her 2 sets of footsteps converging and then a specific sequence of sounds. A short, controlled struggle, not the prolonged crash of a movie fight, just 4 or 5 seconds of impact and position and resistance, and then silence. And then Nathan was dropping through the hatch beside her and pulling the cover shut. She stared at him. His collar was slightly pulled. There was a small cut above his left eyebrow that she couldn't tell was new or old. He looked entirely otherwise composed. "2," he said. "Still 3 in the building." "What are you?" she said. She hadn't meant to say it out loud. He looked at her. A long moment. Something went through his face that wasn't quite discomfort, more like the expression of a man deciding how much of a thing to say. "Right now," he said, "I'm the person who helps you get out of this building with that tablet and something to show for it." She held his gaze for another second. Then she nodded and stood up and wiped the concrete dust off her knee and said, "The executive floor has a security office separate from the lobby system. It connects directly to an external emergency line." "How do we get there?" "There's a service elevator 3 corridors over that goes straight to 42. Marcus doesn't have access codes for it. He's never needed them." "Then that's where we go," Nathan said. She straightened, tucked the tablet tighter under her arm, and started walking. Her shoes were still in her hand. Her knee was going to bruise by morning. The fluorescent lights buzzed their particular frequency, and her heart was going fast, but her head was clear, and she was thinking about the evidence on that tablet and what she was going to do with it. And she was also, in some part of herself that surprised her, aware of the man walking quietly beside her, the quiet driver who'd known the building layout from a diagram and who'd moved through a garage full of armed men with the absolute unhurried certainty of someone who'd navigated worse. She didn't know what that meant yet. She'd have time to figure it out later. Right now, she had a company to save. The service elevator arrived without incident. They stepped in. The doors closed. The floor numbers ticked upward. Nathan stood on the left side of the elevator car with his hands at his sides and watched the numbers. Sienna stood on the right and looked at the tablet in her hands, at the document, at Marcus's name, at the notarized blocks waiting for her signature that she would never give. The tablet's screen was cracked slightly at the bottom corner from when she'd tucked it under her arm, running across the garage. She thought, 42 floors of building and 42 floors of trust to rebuild. She thought, start with what you can prove. Nathan, she said. He looked at her. Thank you, she said. Not formally, just directly. He looked at the numbers again. The elevator was at 31. You should have a doctor look at that knee, he said. She almost laughed. Almost. Yes, she said. I should. The doors opened on 42. They walked out. The building was still standing. The night wasn't over. But Sienna Whitmore had what she needed, and she had a clear head, and she had 4 minutes until she could make a call that would change everything. That was enough to start. The security office on 42 was a small room that smelled like old coffee and printer toner, tucked behind a door marked Authorized Personnel that most of the executive staff had never needed to open. It had 2 monitors showing camera feeds, a phone console with a direct external line, and a metal desk covered in binders that clearly hadn't been reorganized since the previous decade. A half-eaten granola bar sat on top of one binder like someone had meant to come back for it, and never did. Sienna had been in this room exactly twice before. Once during a security audit 2 years ago, and once when a board member's assistant had locked herself out of the main conference room and the master key was kept in here. Both times she'd stood in the doorway. She'd never actually needed the room for anything that mattered. She needed it now. She set the tablet on the desk, picked up the external phone line, and dialed her general counsel's cell number from memory. It rang 4 times, and then Douglas Mercer picked up with the particular hoarse alertness of a man who'd been asleep but was trained by 30 years of corporate law to function immediately, regardless. Mercer. Douglas. It's Sienna. I need you to listen carefully, and I need you to not ask questions until I'm finished. A pause. All right, she told him. Not everything, she didn't have time for everything, but the shape of it. Armed men in the garage, a transfer of operational authority document, Marcus Hale's name on the signature authorization, a tablet with evidence. She kept her voice level, and she kept it brief, and she watched the crack in the tablet screen while she talked, the way your eye catches on small damage when everything else is too large to look at directly. When she finished, Douglas was quiet for 3 seconds. The receivership authorization, is it structured as an emergency provision? I don't know yet. I've only seen the top sheet. Because if it is, and if Marcus has been staging Q4 losses in the financial filings, another pause. Sienna, if someone built a paper case that the company is in financial distress and you've been negligent in addressing it, an emergency receivership could bypass normal board approval. It wouldn't require your signature at all in the end. They were getting it for optics, for speed. She hadn't thought of that yet, and she wished she had. How fast could they move it? If the paperwork is already filed with the court and they have a sympathetic judge, which in this city is not a remote possibility, you could be looking at a temporary order by morning, before you can challenge it. His voice was level and professional, and underneath it was the controlled urgency of a man doing rapid calculations. I need to see that tablet. I need to see everything on it. I'll send you photographs of every page. Nathan, she turned. Nathan was standing near the door, which he'd positioned himself to monitor while she made the call. She held the tablet out. Can you photograph every screen on this? Every document, every file? He took it without comment, pulled out his personal phone, and started working through the tablet methodically. "Douglas," Sienna said, "I need you to file an emergency injunction tonight. Whatever you need to do, whoever you need to call. I need a legal block in place before the courthouse opens. I'll need my partner, and we'll need to wake up Judge Carmichael's clerk, and it's going to cost you in rushed fees. Douglas, I'll start now." She heard him already moving, a drawer opening, papers. "Be careful. If Marcus organized this, he has access to people we don't know about yet." She hung up and looked at Nathan, who was finishing the last set of photographs and handing the tablet back. "Did you get everything?" "Every page that was open. There were 17 files in the main folder. Got all of them." She sent the photographs to Douglas's secure email and then stood for a moment in the small room with the granola bar and the stale coffee smell and the monitors showing empty corridors, and she made herself breathe. Her knee was throbbing. She hadn't looked at it yet. "Sit down for a second," Nathan said. "I'm fine." "You landed hard on that knee in the maintenance corridor. You've been walking on it for 20 minutes. She started to say something dismissive and then didn't because her knee hurt and she was tired and she was 30 years old and running on adrenaline in a building where 5 armed men were currently looking for her. And occasionally the reasonable response to a situation was to sit down for 30 seconds. She sat in the chair at the metal desk. Nathan pulled the other chair over and without making a production of it said, "Let me look." She pushed up the hem of her trousers. The knee was scraped and starting to bruise along the outer edge. Not bad enough to indicate serious damage, but ugly enough. There was a first aid kit on the shelf above the desk. She hadn't noticed it before, and Nathan reached up and took it down and opened it. "You don't have to," she started. "It'll get stiff if you leave the scrape open." He found antiseptic wipes and a bandage without much searching, which suggested he was comfortable in first aid kits. He cleaned the scrape quickly and efficiently, and not particularly gently, but not roughly either, just practically, and she exhaled through her nose and didn't make a sound about it. "You said you looked up every building before a pickup," she said while he worked. "The layout, the exits?" "Yeah. That's not a normal thing that drivers do." He put the bandage on and sat back. "No. What did you do before driving?" He met her eyes. "Security consulting." "Before that?" "A beat. Military." "How long?" 8 years. She studied him, the cut above his eyebrow. Definitely recent, she could see the edge of it more clearly now under the fluorescent light. "What branch?" Something in his face shifted. Not a flinch, but an adjustment. The expression of a man who'd answered this question before and hadn't always wanted to. "Navy." She waited in the way she'd learned to wait in negotiations. The silence that invites people to fill it. He didn't fill it. He closed the first aid kit and put it back on the shelf. "Okay," she said, and let it go. For now. On the camera monitors, Sienna spotted 2 of the remaining garage men on the 28th floor, visible through a corridor camera that apparently was still functional, which contradicted what the lead man had told them about the system being offline. Either he'd lied, or only the garage-level cameras had been disabled, which was a useful distinction. If the building's upper floor cameras were still recording, everything those men had done above the garage was documented. "They're on 28, she said, moving up. Nathan looked at the monitor. "They're checking floor by floor, systematic." He watched the 2 figures on screen for a moment. "They're not panicking. They're still operating like they expect to complete the job." "Because Marcus thinks he has time," Sienna said. "He thinks the document is still in play. He doesn't know what we have." "Does he know you're still in the building?" "He might. He has access to the elevator system analytics. It's part of the building operations platform he oversees." She thought about that. If he pulled the log, he'd see the service elevator went to 42 7 minutes ago. Nathan looked at the door. "Then we can't stay here." "I know." She stood, tested her knee. Stiff, manageable, not going to stop her. "But I don't want to leave this floor yet. The executive conference room is down the hall. It has a secondary server terminal that connects to the company's internal audit archives." "What do you need from the audit archives?" "If Marcus has been staging financial losses to build a receivership case, there'll be anomalies in the quarterly reports, things that were filed internally before they were filed externally. things that only someone with his access level could have introduced. She picked up the tablet. I need the source records, not the summaries. If Douglas is going to file an injunction tonight, I need to give him something that can't be argued away. Nathan looked at her for a moment. How long? 15 minutes, maybe less. The men on 28 will be on 42 in 6 minutes, 7 at the outside. Then I need 12. She was already moving toward the door. Can you give me that? He looked at the monitors again, then at her. I'll work on it, he said, which was not the same as yes, but was, she was beginning to understand, about as committed as Nathan Cole got before he knew the full picture. Well, the executive conference room at 11:43 on a Tuesday night was a different place than the executive conference room at 4 in the afternoon. The city was visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows on 3 sides. A specific kind of city at midnight, not asleep exactly, but quieter. The traffic below reduced to individual sets of headlights instead of the daytime blur. The long conference table was still set up from the board meeting. Glasses of water, mostly undrunk, legal pads with notes in different handwriting, Marcus Hale's laptop still sitting at his customary chair because he'd left in a hurry or had expected to return. Sienna sat at the secondary server terminal at the room's far end and logged in with her CEO credentials. Nathan positioned himself near the door with a sight line to the hallway. She pulled up the internal audit archive and started working backwards through the quarterly reports, Q4, Q3, Q2. She was looking for discrepancies between the preliminary internal filings and the final external versions. In normal operations, these should match closely. Minor adjustments happen: rounding, timing differences, accounting methodology corrections. What she was looking for was structural, changes to core loss figures, inventory write-downs that appeared in the external filing but not in the preliminary internal record, revenue deferrals that had been manually adjusted after the preliminary close. She found the first one 4 minutes in. Q3, inventory write-down, Pacific Northwest distribution. The preliminary internal filing showed a write-down of $2.3 million. Accurate, she remembered it. She'd signed off on the preliminary herself. The final external version showed $7.8 million, a $5.5 million discrepancy that had appeared between the internal preliminary and the external filing, in a quarter where the company had been on the edge of their debt covenant thresholds. I found it, she said, not quite to herself. How bad? Nathan asked from the door, without looking away from the hallway. Bad enough. She was already pulling the Q2 records. He inflated the losses, selectively, surgically, not enough to trigger an automatic audit flag, but enough to build a cumulative picture of financial distress. Over 3 quarters, he's manufactured roughly $18 million in fake losses. To make the case for receivership. To make the case that I've been negligent in managing the company's financial health, and that an emergency third-party receiver needs to step in. She was taking screenshots, sending them to Douglas's secure email as fast as the terminal allowed. This took months of planning. He didn't do this alone. Someone with legal expertise helped him structure it. Someone who knew exactly what threshold a court would need to see. The man with the tablet. She looked up. What? The man in the garage with the tablet. He wasn't muscle. He was too careful, too precise. He was managing the process. Nathan was still watching the hallway. He may have been the legal architect. She hadn't connected that yet, and she should have. She thought about the tablet's document interface, the careful structuring of the transfer authorization, the notary fields. That wasn't a document that Muscle prepared. If I can identify him, he was 6'1", late 30s, right-handed, had a scar on his left wrist that looked surgical, wore a watch that was too expensive for someone hired as a garage operative. His shoes were dress shoes, not work shoes. Nathan said it flat, like reading a list of known facts. He was either the lawyer or the lawyer's representative. Either way, he'll have a name in your legal filing somewhere. Sienna stared at him. I notice things, he said, with the mild tone of someone stating a preference for a particular type of coffee. Clearly, she turned back to the terminal and pulled the last set of records. Marcus has been with me for 4 years. He was one of the first people I hired when I took over. My father liked him. She said this without emotion, which was its own kind of emotion. I gave him operational authority over half the company's infrastructure because I trusted his judgment. People use trust when they're patient, Nathan said. Most betrayals aren't impulsive. She looked at him. He was still watching the hallway, jaw set, expression neutral. That's a specific observation. Yeah. A pause. How much more time do you need? She checked what she'd sent to Douglas. 7 sets of source records, each one showing the discrepancy between the internal preliminary and the external final. It wasn't everything, but it was enough. Enough to establish a pattern, enough for an injunction argument, enough to make a judge pause before rubber stamping anything Marcus had filed. I'm done, she said. I have what I need. Nathan's posture shifted. Barely. A small adjustment, a change in stillness that she was starting to recognize as his version of urgency. They're on 39. She logged out, stood, picked up Marcus's laptop from the conference table without pausing. It was company property, and it was on company premises, and she was still the CEO, and said, "Where to?" "There's a server room 2 doors down, single entry, easy to hold if it comes to that." He was already moving. "But I want to know your end goal before we get pinned anywhere." She fell into step beside him. "My end goal is to be in that boardroom when Marcus walks in tomorrow morning." Nathan kept walking. "That's 12 hours from now." "No, not tomorrow morning, tonight." She said it like she'd already decided, which she had, somewhere in the conference room while the audit records came up on the screen. The emergency board session he called, the one he was planning to use to ratify the receivership once I'd signed, it was scheduled for midnight. I saw it on his calendar last week, labeled as a fire drill review. I thought it was odd at the time. Nathan stopped, turned to look at her. A midnight board session. If you're going to push through an emergency receivership, you want board cover. You want a quorum present when you file. That's why tonight. That's why the timing. The men in the garage were supposed to get my signature before midnight, and then Marcus was going to walk into that boardroom with a signed document and a board quorum and complete the takeover while I was either too scared to stop it or physically unable to. Where's the boardroom? 41. 1 floor down. The men from the garage know we're on 42. Yes. She held his gaze. I'm going to need you to help me get past them. Nathan looked at her for a moment in the hallway outside the server room, and she saw him running something through his head. Not whether to help her, she didn't think it was that, more like the specific logistics of a problem he was already committing to solving. How many board members does Marcus need for a quorum? 7 out of 12. He's been managing that meeting list for weeks. I saw him making calls, thought it was routine. She was working through it as she said it. He'll have his 7 locked in. He'll have positioned it as an emergency governance meeting with a cover story, probably the Q4 financial concerns he's been manufacturing. They may not even know what they're actually there to ratify. Or some of them do. She hadn't let herself think that yet. Or some of them do, she agreed, and it landed with the specific weight of something you'd known was possible and hadn't wanted to confirm. Then going into that room isn't just about confronting Marcus. It's about not knowing who else in that room is part of this. That's correct? He thought about it. Not long, 5 seconds, maybe 6. Okay, what does Marcus know about you? Specifically, what does he know about how you handle pressure? The question surprised her. What? In a negotiation, in a crisis, what does he expect you to do? She thought about it honestly. He expects me to be controlled. He expects me to go through proper channels, to be methodical, to wait until I have complete information before I act. She paused. He thinks I'm predictable. Good, Nathan said. Then walk into that boardroom. That's your strategy? It's your strategy. You already decided to do it. I'm agreeing with it. Something in his expression, not quite dry, but close. The element of surprise works best when the other person is sure they know what you'll do. Marcus is sitting in that boardroom right now, waiting to hear from his men that the garage job is done. What's the last thing he expects to see? Me, she said, walking in with evidence. With evidence, Nathan confirmed, and someone standing next to you who already took 3 of his people off the board in a parking garage. She looked at him. You're not subtle. I'm very subtle, he said. That's actually the whole thing. The stairwell from 42 to 41 took them 30 seconds and no encounters. The men from the garage were still searching the building above them, which gave them a narrow window. Nathan checked the 41 corridor through the stairwell door's wire mesh window before they went through, saw it clear, and held the door. The boardroom was at the end of the hall. Its glass walls were frosted at eye level for privacy, but the lights were on, visible as a warm band above the frosting. And through the gap at the bottom, she could see the shadows of people seated at the table. They were already there. The midnight session. Sienna stopped outside the door and took 2 seconds that she needed for herself. She had the tablet. She had photographs of the audit records, sent to Douglas, who was currently filing paperwork on the other end of a phone somewhere in the city. She had Marcus's laptop. She had a cut-off driver with Navy training standing slightly behind her right shoulder in a way that felt oddly and specifically like being covered. She did not have complete information. She did not know which board members were compromised. She did not know whether the legal filing had already gone through. She did not know if Marcus had heard from his garage team yet or what he'd been told. She put her hand on the boardroom door. "If it goes sideways in there," she said quietly, not quite looking at Nathan. "It won't," he said. "But if it does." A beat. "Then I'll handle it," he said. "Same as the garage." She pushed the door open and walked in. There were 9 people at the table. Marcus Hale was at the far end, where her father used to sit, in the chair where the CEO traditionally sat, which was such a specific and deliberate choice that she felt it like a physical thing in the center of her chest. He had papers in front of him and a phone in his hand, and his face, when he looked up and saw her, went through 4 expressions in approximately 2 seconds: shock, calculation, recovery, and then something that tried to be composure and wasn't quite. "Sienna," he said it carefully, measured. "We weren't expecting you." "I know," she said. "That was the point." She walked to the table. She put the tablet and Marcus's laptop down in front of her, and she looked at the 9 faces. Some confused, some carefully neutral, 2 that wouldn't meet her eyes. "I want to be clear," she said, "about what's been happening. Not because I think everyone in this room is part of it, but because I think everyone in this room deserves to know before they sign anything or vote on anything tonight." She kept her voice level, not raised, the kind of level that in a quiet room required everyone else to be quiet too. Marcus has spent approximately 8 months manufacturing a financial distress profile for this company, falsifying internal records, inflating reported losses, and preparing a legal framework for an emergency receivership that would hand operational control of Whitmore Global to a third party he controls. The room was very still. Tonight, he sent 5 armed men to the parking garage of this building to force my signature on a transfer authorization document. She put the cracked tablet on the table and turned it to face the room. "This is the document. These are the records I pulled from the audit archive an hour ago, showing the discrepancies between our internal preliminary filings and the external versions Marcus controlled." She looked at Marcus directly. "And in about 2 hours, my general counsel will be filing an emergency injunction with enough source evidence to freeze every legal action you've taken in the last 6 months. Marcus had his hands flat on the table. His expression was still working toward composed and still not getting there. "That's..." He stopped, started again. "That's a serious accusation." "It is," she said. "I'm making it seriously. You have no..." "I have 17 files from your document interface, Marcus. I have source audit records from 3 consecutive quarters showing manual adjustments made under your access credentials. I have a signed transfer authorization document with your name on it that was delivered by armed men to my parking garage tonight." She picked up his laptop. "And I have your work computer, which I'm confident contains email correspondence that my legal team is going to find very informative." She set it back down. "So I'd like you to think very carefully before you finish that sentence." The silence in the room was the kind that means things have shifted and everyone present knows it. Marcus looked at the laptop, then at the tablet. And this was the moment she watched for, the moment she'd seen happen in enough negotiations to recognize it. He looked past her. She didn't turn around. She didn't need to. She'd felt Nathan move slightly when she'd walked to the table, positioning himself at the room's edge with a clear line of sight to every person present, and she knew that whatever Marcus saw when he looked past her was the same thing the garage operatives had seen before things went wrong for them. I think, Marcus said slowly, that this is a misunderstanding that we can discuss privately. We're past private, Sienna said. You made it public when you brought it into my parking garage. She looked at the board members. Some of their faces told her things she'd file away for later. I'm calling an emergency board session for tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock, with full legal representation present. Any board member who was aware of or participated in what Marcus has prepared tonight will want to speak with their personal counsel before attending. She kept her voice even and looked at each face, no exceptions. And any board member who was brought here tonight without knowing what this meeting was actually for, I appreciate your presence, and I want to assure you the company's position is stronger than the records you've been shown. She picked up the tablet in Marcus's laptop. She looked at Marcus one last time. He looked older than he had at 6 o'clock, in the board meeting that had run 47 minutes over. He looked like a man doing the math and not liking the sum. Don't leave the building, she said. Security will want to speak with you. She walked out. Nathan was beside her in the hallway. The boardroom door swung shut behind them, and through the glass she could see the shapes of 9 people not moving. The specific paralysis of a room in which the story everyone had agreed on had just been replaced by a different story. She kept walking until she reached the end of the hall, and then she stopped and put her hand on the wall and breathed. You okay? Nathan said. Ask me in 5 minutes. Her hands were shaking slightly, not from fear, the adrenaline exiting her system the way it always does, suddenly and all at once, leaving the body holding whatever the tension had been covering. That went, yeah, he said. Marcus didn't call for his security people. That means either he doesn't have more, or he knows it's over. Nathan looked back at the boardroom. He's a planner. Planners don't pivot well when the plan is exposed. He's calculating whether there's a move left and there isn't, and he knows it. Her phone buzzed. Douglas Mercer. Injunction filed. Emergency hearing scheduled 6 a.m. Judge Alvarez. Your evidence package is solid. Where are you? She typed back, still in the building. Call me in 10. She looked at Nathan. He was looking at the far end of the hallway, the direction the stairwell was, where men with guns had been searching for them 20 minutes ago. His focus moved the way it apparently always moved. Not restless, just continuously checking. The habit of someone for whom vigilance had once been the difference between coming home and not. Your daughter, Sienna said. He looked at her. You said, the garage man said you had a family and you should get back to them. You didn't correct him. No, Nathan said. How old? 8. Something changed in his voice when he said it, not softened exactly. More like arrived at a destination. Her name's Maya. She knows where you are tonight? She knows I'm driving. She knows I'm late. She'll be asleep by now. He looked at his watch, the plain practical watch of a man who needed to know the time and nothing else. Her babysitter stays until I get back. Sienna thought about a man who had an 8-year-old daughter and who had still positioned himself between her and 5 armed men without hesitation. She thought about what that cost and what it said about the kind of person who was willing to pay it. Go home, she said. I'll have building security here within 10 minutes. Douglas is filing. I have what I need. He looked at her. You sure? The hard part is over. She wasn't completely sure that was true, but she was sure enough. Marcus isn't going anywhere. His people in the building are trying to figure out how to leave without being documented. Your job here is done. He held her gaze for a moment, something passing through his expression that she couldn't fully read. Not reluctance exactly, more like the specific pause of someone who'd been trained to see a thing through to its conclusion and was choosing, deliberately, to trust that it was concluded. I'll need to give a statement, he said, to the police. Tomorrow. I'll have my assistant contact you with the details. I'll make sure it's scheduled around your daughter. She looked at him steadily. Nathan, go home. He nodded. Looked at the boardroom one more time, then at the stairwell, then back at her. A last check, she understood. Not of the building, but of her. Whether she was actually all right. I'm fine, she said, before he could ask it. Your knee's going to be worse in the morning, he said. I know. He walked toward the elevator bank. She watched him go. The unhurried stride, the slight rightward carriage of his shoulders that she'd noticed in the garage, the absolute absence of drama in the way he moved. A man who had just taken apart a coordinated attack in a parking garage, broken a corporate conspiracy on the 42nd floor, and stood beside her while she walked into a boardroom and dismantled 4 years of careful betrayal, and who was now, without fanfare or visible investment in being recognized for any of it, going home to his 8-year-old daughter. She turned back toward the conference room and her phone and the long, difficult, necessary work that came next. The night wasn't over, but the night had shifted, and Sienna Whitmore knew the difference between a fight she was losing and a fight she'd already turned. This one had turned. She didn't sleep. That wasn't unusual. Sienna had never been a good sleeper, even in the years before the company, before her father's stroke, before the particular weight of being responsible for 4,000 employees and a billion-dollar balance sheet settled onto her in a way that didn't lift when she closed her eyes. But the hours between leaving the 41st floor boardroom and arriving at the emergency hearing at 6 a.m. were a specific kind of sleeplessness, the kind where your mind keeps running the same sequence of events looking for the thing you missed, the door you left unlocked, the assumption you made that could unravel everything. Building security had arrived at 11:58 p.m., 12 minutes after she'd walked out of the boardroom. 2 of Marcus's garage operatives had been apprehended on the 34th floor, still searching for her. The other 3, including the lead man and the man with the tablet, had apparently reached the loading dock and exited through the service alley before the lockdown completed. They were gone, which was a problem Douglas Mercer flagged immediately and which Sienna filed under things she couldn't control tonight and would deal with tomorrow. Marcus had not attempted to leave. He'd sat in the boardroom until security arrived, his phone face down on the table in front of him, and when the officers asked him to come with them, he'd stood and straightened his jacket and said he wanted his lawyer, which was the first sensible thing he'd done all evening. 2 of the 9 board members who'd been in that room, Owen Baxter and Claudia Race, had left immediately after Sienna, separately, via different elevators, which told her something about their level of pre-knowledge that she confirmed the next morning when Douglas's investigator pulled their email correspondence from the company server. The 6 a.m. hearing lasted 40 minutes. Judge Alvarez reviewed Douglas's injunction filing, reviewed the audit records, reviewed the transfer authorization document from the tablet, and issued a temporary restraining order freezing all legal actions Marcus had initiated or filed under his operational authority for the past 6 months. He also issued a preservation order for all company records and communications under Marcus's access credentials. It wasn't a complete victory. It was a pause, a legal breath held, but it was enough to stop the receivership clock and enough to give Sienna's team time to build the full case. She was back in her office by 7:30. Priya arrived at 7 o'clock, having already heard from building security and had coffee ready and the Harrington contracts organized and, somehow, a cheese Danish that she'd apparently bought from the all-night bakery 3 blocks over, which Sienna ate in 4 bites standing at her desk because she hadn't eaten since lunch the previous day and her body had started presenting that information as a low-grade headache behind her left eye. "Daniel's back Monday," Priya said, "but I thought you might want Nathan Cole's contact information for the statement. Schedule it for Thursday afternoon, after 2. Sienna drank the coffee. "And get me Owen Baxter and Claudia Reese's personnel files, everything, employment history, equity positions, any side agreements or consulting arrangements." Priya made the note. "Are you going to sleep at some point today?" "Tonight." She looked at the city through her office windows, all morning now, gray and overcast, the early commute beginning below. Everything looked the same as it always did. Buildings, traffic, people who had no idea what had happened 42 floors above them 12 hours ago. "I have a board session at 9. I need to be clear for that. You have a bruise on your knee and a look on your face that my mother calls the 1,000-yard stare. I'm fine." "You always say that." "Because I'm always fine." She set down the coffee. "Get me the files, Priya." The 9 a.m. emergency board session was not the same room it had been at midnight. Different configuration, daylight instead of fluorescent, full coffee service. The 3 board members who'd had nothing to do with Marcus's plan arriving with the careful alertness of people who'd been receiving calls since 6 in the morning and wanted to understand what they'd walked into the night before. The 2 who had been complicit, Owen and Claudia, were absent, represented instead by their personal attorneys, which was its own form of admission. Sienna stood at the head of the table where Marcus had been sitting 10 hours earlier. She'd gone home at 7:55 a.m., showered and changed, and returned by 8:40. She looked composed because she'd been composing herself in front of difficult rooms for 4 years, and she knew how to do it regardless of what was happening underneath. She laid it out completely this time. Every document, every discrepancy, every email her team had pulled overnight from Marcus's accessed files. The timeline of the financial record falsification, 8 months, beginning the quarter after his last performance review, the one where she'd told him directly that she was restructuring the operational reporting structure and his role would be reduced. She hadn't known until 4 a.m., reading through the email chain Douglas's investigator had flagged, that the performance review was the trigger, that Marcus had sat across from her in the same room and nodded and said he understood, and then gone back to his office and started building the mechanism to take her company. She didn't say that part out loud. She kept it in the register of facts and evidence and legal consequence because that was the language the boardroom required, and because the other part, the specific ache of a 4-year working relationship that had apparently been a performance, that part was hers, and she wasn't putting it on the table. The remaining board members were shaken and serious and asking the right questions. How much real financial damage had the falsified records caused with their lenders? What was the actual Q4 position? How many people in the company had known? Sienna answered what she could and was direct about what was still being determined, which the board, to their credit, received better than they might have if she'd tried to smooth it over. By 10:30, they had a resolution. Marcus Hale's employment was terminated effective immediately. Owen Baxter and Claudia Reese's board seats were suspended pending the investigation's completion. A forensic accounting firm would be brought in within 48 hours to conduct an independent review of the past 12 months of financials. Sienna was authorized to make any interim executive appointments necessary to maintain operational continuity. She thanked them and meant it, which was more than she usually meant when she said it. After they filed out, she sat alone in the boardroom for 6 minutes, not thinking about next steps. Next steps were already organized in her head, already a list Priya was managing. She sat there because she needed 6 minutes where she wasn't performing anything for anyone, where she could be a 30-year-old woman who had built something significant and then watch someone she trusted try to steal it and let that be what it was before she put it away and moved forward. 6 minutes. Then she straightened, picked up her folio, and went back to work. Nathan's police statement was scheduled for Thursday, but the detective assigned to the case, a compact, precise woman named Detective Karen Lyle, who had the specific manner of someone who had heard every version of every story and was interested only in the version that matched the physical evidence, called him on Wednesday morning and asked if he could come in that afternoon instead. The garage operatives who'd been apprehended were talking, which meant the detectives needed to move fast to lock statements before the attorneys started shaping the narrative. Nathan arranged for Maya's babysitter to come at noon and was at the precinct by 2. He gave the statement the way he gave most things, directly, without elaboration, covering exactly what he'd observed and done in sequence. Detective Lyle had a habit of pausing after he finished a sentence, a silence that was clearly deliberate, designed to see whether the subject would fill it with something unplanned. Nathan had been on the other end of enough debriefs to recognize the technique, and he didn't fill the silences. At one point, she looked up from her notes and said, "You disabled 2 armed men in a parking garage, navigated the building's maintenance system, and recovered key evidence from a secured vehicle, all while protecting a civilian. That's a significant set of skills for a driver." "I had 8 years in the Navy," Nathan said. "What did you do in the Navy?" "Special operations." Another pause. "SEAL?" "Yes." She wrote something. "You've been driving corporate clients for 14 months. "Yes." "Any particular reason for the career change?" He looked at her. "I have a daughter." Detective Lyle met his eyes, made another note, and moved on. She was professional enough to understand that some answers contain everything necessary and nothing extra. The statement took 2 hours. When he walked out of the precinct, the afternoon was overcast and smelled like rain that hadn't arrived yet. He sat in his car for a minute and called the babysitter, who confirmed Maya was home, had finished her homework, and was currently attempting to teach the neighbor's cat to perform what she was calling circus tricks in the backyard. "Is the cat participating willingly?" Nathan asked. "The cat," the babysitter said, "seems deeply uncertain about the whole arrangement." He drove home. Maya had drawn a picture of a race car on the back of her homework folder. Not a specific race car, a generic one with large wheels and flames coming off the back that she'd colored in orange and red with crayon. The flames slightly lopsided on one side in a way that gave the drawing a specific personality. She showed it to him at dinner. Chicken and rice, Wednesday's standard, a routine that Maya had established and enforced with the consistency of someone who understood that routines mattered even when they couldn't have articulated why. "I'm going to be a race car driver when I grow up," she announced. "You said last week you were going to be a marine biologist." "I can be both. That's a wide career path. Mrs. Patterson says I can be whatever I want." She ate a forkful of rice. "Can I be both?" "Mathematically, yes. Practically, the training is pretty different." She thought about this with the deliberate seriousness she brought to questions that interested her. "Which one takes longer to learn?" "Marine biology has more school. Race car driving has more," he considered, "physical consequence for getting it wrong." "Like crashing?" "Like crashing." She nodded, weighing the trade-offs. "I'll think about it." She ate more rice. "Were you late last night because of work?" "Yes." "Was it a long drive?" "It was a long night." He told her he was late because of work, which was true, and hadn't told her anything else, which was also a choice he'd made and would stand behind. "It's handled now." She looked at him with the directness that 8-year-olds deploy when they've decided to say the thing they've been thinking. Kara said her dad works late sometimes because his job is hard, and it makes him stressed. "Are you stressed?" "I was last night," he said honestly. "I'm not now." She studied his face for a moment, the careful look she'd inherited from him and used with more precision than he often expected, and apparently satisfied herself that this was true, because she went back to her dinner and said, "I saved you the last of the orange juice." "Thanks, Maya." "It was a lot," she said. "There was a lot left, so it wasn't that generous." He almost smiled. "Still counts." Sienna called on Friday. He saw the number, not one he had saved, but the area code and exchange matched the Whitmore Global Exchange he'd driven to for 3 days, and picked up on the second ring. "Nathan, it's Sienna Whitmore." A brief pause, as if she'd expected to leave a message and was recalibrating. "I wanted to call before my assistant set up any formal follow-up, to say thank you properly." "You already said thank you." "In a parking garage maintenance corridor while running from armed men. I'm not sure that counts as properly." There was something in her voice that was less than the controlled register she'd used during the crisis. Not informal exactly, but less armored. "How did the statement go?" "Fine. Detective Lyle is thorough." "She is. She's been good to work with." A beat. "Marcus is cooperating. The man with the tablet, his name is Russell Crane. He's a disbarred attorney Marcus brought in specifically for this. He turned himself in yesterday morning, apparently because his lawyer told him cooperation was his only viable option." She was telling him this the way she'd told him the audit discrepancies in the conference room. Not filling time, just relaying information she thought he'd want to have. "The other 3 operatives are still outstanding. Detective Lyle thinks they're out of state." "They'll surface," Nathan said. "People like that don't stay quiet." "That's what she said." Another pause, slightly longer. "I wanted to ask you something, and you don't have to answer, and it won't affect anything related to the statement or the case." He waited. "That night in the garage was when that man grabbed my wrist. You were already watching the van before I came down. You'd already clocked something was wrong." "Yes?" "How long before I came in?" "About 4 minutes." "You tried to text Priya." "To delay you coming down, yes. It didn't get to her in time." She was quiet for a second. "If I'd taken the elevator instead of the stairs, it would have taken me 90 seconds longer to reach the garage. Would that have been enough time?" He thought about the positioning of the men, the van, the SUV. What 4 more minutes would have meant for his options. Possibly. Maybe. It's hard to say how they would have adjusted. But you would have handled it differently, with more preparation. Probably, he paused. It went the way it went. You handled it well. I made up a lie about the security system. That bought time. Time was the resource we needed. She made a short sound that might have been a reluctant laugh. I've been replaying it, every version of how it could have gone differently. That's normal, he said. You'll do it for a while and then you'll do it less. Does it go away completely? He thought about the question honestly. For most people, yes. For people who've been through it more than once, it becomes smaller. It takes up less space. Have you been through it more than once? Yes. She didn't ask for elaboration, which he appreciated. I also wanted to ask you, again, no obligation, whether you'd be open to a conversation about your future work. Not the driving position. Something different. You mentioned consulting. I did. I mean it. But I wanted to do it as a real conversation, not a transaction. A slight hesitation. I can be transactional when I'm tired, and I've been very tired this week. I know, he said. I can have that conversation. Next week, I'll have Priya send you options. That works. Another pause. How's your daughter? The question caught him slightly off guard. Not unpleasantly, more like an unexpected turn in a familiar road. She's good. She's currently undecided between marine biology and race car driving. A beat. And then Sienna Whitmore, who had been composed and controlled and relentlessly professional since the moment he'd met her 3 days ago, laughed. Genuinely, briefly, the laugh of someone caught off guard by something that landed when they weren't braced for it. That's a reasonable range of options at 8, she said. That's what I told her. They said goodbye, and he set the phone down and sat with it for a moment. Maya was in the next room, reading, the particular silence of a child completely absorbed in a book. Outside the window, the Friday evening was starting to settle into night. He picked up his own book, the one about the grandmother who was a retired spy, and found his page. The following Tuesday, 19 days after the garage, Nathan walked into Whitmore Global through the main lobby entrance. He'd driven through the underground garage entrance 3 times before and had never come through the front. The lobby was the kind of lobby that corporations build when they want visitors to understand immediately that the company is substantial. High ceilings, the company name in brushed steel lettering above the reception desk, the soft noise of a building full of people doing things that mattered to someone. A security guard checked his name against a list and issued him a visitor badge and directed him to the 42nd floor. The elevator ride up was unremarkable. He looked at the floor numbers and thought about nothing specific. Priya met him at the elevator bank, efficient, warm, slightly overworked in the way of people who are good at their jobs and therefore given too many of them. She walked him to a conference room that was not the main boardroom, a smaller one at the east end of the floor with windows overlooking a different part of the city. There was coffee and water. Sienna arrived 3 minutes later with a leather folio and no jacket, in a white button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbow, which was somehow more human than the way she'd looked in the garage. You found it okay? She said, sitting across from him. The lobby's harder to navigate than the maintenance corridors, he said. She looked at him for a second and then she smiled, properly, not the controlled version, and said, Fair point. She opened the folio. I want to be direct about what I'm proposing so you have the full picture before you decide anything. Go ahead. The company's security infrastructure failed comprehensively on the night of the garage incident, not because the technology was bad, because the person overseeing it was compromised. Marcus had access to security operations as part of his operational authority. He used that access to disable the garage cameras and to ensure that the building's night security staff was occupied with a fabricated systems alert on the service level. She said it without visible emotion, the way she'd described the audit records, as a problem to be understood and addressed. I need someone to rebuild the security function from the outside, not an internal appointment, because I can't fully trust internal assessments right now. An independent consultant who reports directly to me and to no one else. What does that look like practically? Audit of the current systems, assessment of vulnerabilities, staffing evaluation. I need to know if anyone in the security team was part of what Marcus built, protocol recommendations, and on an ongoing basis, a direct advisory relationship where I have someone I can actually trust to give me an honest read instead of a managed one. She looked at him steadily. I know what you're going to say. That you left the military because you wanted something quieter. That your priority is your daughter. that this sounds like it could expand into something that takes more than you want to give. He waited. I'm not asking for your life, she said. I'm asking for your judgment. On your terms, at hours that work for you, with a retainer that's, frankly, more than you're making driving, and flex time that you set, not me. She turned a page in her folio. I had our HR team prepare a contract structure. I want you to look at it and tell me what doesn't work and we'll change it. He took the contract pages she slid across the table. He read them at the pace he read things, completely, not skimming. She didn't rush him or fill the silence. The retainer figure was on the second page. He looked at it and kept his expression level, which required a small effort. It was more than he was making driving. The flex arrangement, he said. I need school pickup at 3:15 on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Non-negotiable. Done. And I don't carry a weapon on this job. She looked at him. Is that personal preference? He said. I know how to use one. I'd rather not have one. If a situation escalates to the point where I need one, something has already gone wrong that I should have caught earlier. She considered this. Okay. I'll need full access to the security system architecture. Not reports. The actual system. Logs, access records, admin credentials. You'll have it within 48 hours of signing. He set the contract pages down and looked at them for a moment, the way he'd looked at the building diagram in the car before the first pickup, mapping the shape of the thing, finding the points he needed to know. I want to be clear about something, he said. All right? I'm good at what I do. The skills you saw in the garage, those are real and I can apply them here. But I'm not the same person I was when I was doing that full time. I've been building a different kind of life for 3 years, and that's not going to change because the work changed. He met her eyes. I'm telling you this because I want you to understand who you're hiring. Not a version of someone who put that life down and is ready to pick it back up. Someone who put it down deliberately and is willing to use pieces of it, carefully, in a context that doesn't require giving up the rest. She held his gaze for a moment. I understand that, she said, and that's specifically why I'm asking you. He picked up the contract. I'll have my attorney look at this and get back to you by end of week. That's fine. She paused. Can I ask you something? Yes. In the garage, when you positioned yourself between me and those men, before you knew how it was going to go, were you scared? He thought about it honestly, which she seemed to expect. She had the quality of a person who could distinguish between honest answers and managed ones, and found the managed ones less useful. I was aware of the risk, he said. That's not exactly the same as scared. Scared is when the awareness paralyzes you. I knew what the risk was, and I made a decision, and then I was busy. Busy, she repeated like she was testing the word. There wasn't time to be scared. There was only time to do the next thing. She was quiet for a second. I was scared, she said, when that man grabbed my wrist. I was very scared, and then something went flat and cold, and I stopped being scared and started thinking about what to do. That's not nothing, he said. A lot of people can't make that transition. I've run a company for 4 years. I've been in rooms where people wanted to take things from me. She looked at the table, briefly, then back. I just hadn't been in a garage. Most people haven't. He stood, picked up the contract pages. I'll call you Friday. She stood too. They were on the same side of the table now, close enough that he was aware of it, in the way you're aware of physical proximity to someone who'd been, in a very short and compressed time, both a stranger and someone you'd navigated something serious alongside. It was an odd combination. Nathan, she said. He looked at her. What you did that night, for me and for the company, and the employees who would have been affected if Marcus had succeeded. She said it directly, no performance in it. That mattered. I want you to know that I know that. He nodded, not dismissively. He understood what she was saying and received it. He just didn't need it to be larger than it was. Call me if anything comes up before Friday, he said. With the outstanding operatives still out there, keep varying your route home. She blinked. I didn't think about that. That's why you need someone thinking about it. He moved toward the door. I'll be in touch. He walked back through the lobby and out into the city, the visitor badge in his pocket, the contract pages in his hand, the Tuesday morning sun breaking through the overcast for the first time that week. He thought about Maya's drawing of the race car, the lopsided flames, The specific energy of someone 8 years old making something with total commitment and no self-consciousness. He thought, all right. He walked to the parking garage, the public one, 3 blocks over, where he'd parked the personal car, and got in and drove toward the school because Tuesday was one of his pickup days and it was already nearly 3. He signed the contract on a Thursday, not because he'd needed the full week to decide. He'd known by Wednesday morning, reading through his attorney's notes on the terms, that the structure was fair and the work was something he could do without losing the shape of the life he'd built. He waited until Thursday because Thursday was Maya's last day of her school reading project, and she'd asked him the night before if he would be home for dinner so she could tell him how it went, and he'd said yes, and he wanted the day to be about that first and the contract second. He emailed the signed pages to Priya at 4:47 p.m. after dinner, after Maya had told him, at length, with the specific narrative energy she brought to things that mattered to her, that her reading project had received the highest mark in the class, and that Mrs. Patterson had read a passage from Maya's review aloud to the whole room, which Maya described as kind of embarrassing, but also actually really good. Embarrassing how? Nathan asked. Because everyone looked at me. Is that embarrassing or is that something else? She thought about it. Both, she decided, at the same time. That's what pride feels like when you're not used to it yet, he said. She considered this with the seriousness she gave things worth considering. Is that what it feels like when you do something good at work? Sometimes. He thought about Tuesday mornings, about the way Sienna had looked at him across the small conference room, about the contract in his hand in the parking garage sunlight. Sometimes it just feels like the next thing that needed doing. That sounds less exciting. Excitement is overrated. You always say that, because it's always true. His first week at Whitmore Global, officially with the badge that said security consultant rather than visitor, was not dramatic. That was intentional. Nathan had learned in the years before driving that the worst thing you could do when entering a compromised system was to announce yourself loudly. You moved quietly. You observed before you changed anything. You tried to understand what the system believed about itself before you showed it what it actually was. The security team at Whitmore Global consisted of 7 full-time staff and a rotating overnight crew of 4, managed by a director named Gerald Park, who had been in the role for 6 years, and who received Nathan's arrival with the careful professionalism of a man who understood that an outside consultant reporting directly to the CEO was either a validation of his work or a prelude to his replacement, and wasn't yet sure which. Nathan spent the first 3 days reviewing access logs, system architecture, and incident reports going back 18 months. He did this at a workstation in the security office, not in the executive suite, because proximity to the work mattered, and because he wanted Gerald Park to be able to observe him working, which was a form of respect that Gerald seemed to recognize and respond to without it being named. On the 4th day, Nathan found the second breach. It wasn't dramatic. It never was, with this kind of thing. A pattern in the access logs. An admin credential used to access the building management system at 2:17 a.m. on 6 separate occasions over 4 months. The credential belonged to a junior security technician named Dennis Cho, who had been on overnight rotation during 5 of those 6 dates. On the 6th date, Dennis Cho had been on approved leave. Someone had used his credentials remotely from an IP address that resolved to a coffee shop 4 blocks from the building. Nathan printed the log and brought it to Gerald Park without announcement or commentary. He set it on Gerald's desk and said, "I need you to look at this with me." Gerald looked. His expression went through several things, ending somewhere between sick and angry. "That's Dennis's login." "Yes." "He was on leave for the 6th one." "Yes." So either someone had his credentials or—" "I don't know yet," Nathan said. "I want to know before we move on it. Can you pull his file?" Gerald pulled it. Dennis Cho had been with the company for 14 months. Hired 4 months before Marcus had begun his financial falsification campaign, Nathan noted without saying, and had unremarkable performance reviews. Good attendance, no disciplinary history. His access level was junior. Building management systems, camera operations, door lock protocols. Not financial records, not executive scheduling. But building management access was enough to disable garage cameras and generate fabricated systems alerts, which were exactly the tools Marcus had used on the night of the garage incident. Nathan spent 2 days building the evidence quietly, the way he'd built things during his Navy years, methodically, without noise, each piece placed carefully before moving to the next. When he had enough, he brought it to Sienna. She was in her office at 6:30 p.m., which he'd already understood was not unusual, that her days started early and ended late, and the hours between were continuous in a way that most people would find unsustainable, but that she seemed to run on, reviewing quarterly projections with her new interim CFO, a sharp, precise woman named Dr. Adeyes Okafor, who had been brought in from the forensic accounting firm, and who had, in 3 weeks, become the most valued person in the company's financial operations. "Give me 5 minutes," Sienna told Dr. Okafor, who collected her papers and left with the efficiency of someone accustomed to being dismissed and not bothered by it. Nathan sat across from Sienna and walked her through what he'd found. She read the access logs. She looked at the IP resolution. She said nothing for a while, and he understood the silence. It was the same silence she'd had in the conference room, looking at Marcus's name on the tablet. The silence of someone absorbing the information that the breach went further than they'd thought. "Dennis Cho," she said. "He may not be a willing participant. Someone could have compromised his credentials without his knowledge, or, more likely, offered him money for access information. People in junior positions who feel underpaid are a standard target." "How old is he?" 26. She was quiet for a moment. "That's young to be caught up in something like this." "Yes," he paused. "I'd recommend letting Detective Lyle handle the conversation with him. If he was coerced or financially pressured, cooperation is his best option, and a good detective will make that clear. If he was a willing participant, you want it on record properly." She looked at the logs again. "How many more?" "Don't know yet. I'm still working through the full 18-month access record. There may be 1 or 2 more points of entry, smaller ones. I'll have a complete picture by end of next week." She set the logs down and sat back. In the evening light, her office had a different quality than it did in the morning. Less official, the controlled performance of a CEO giving way to something more like exhaustion, and the particular weight of someone who kept finding each week that the thing they thought was the last layer was not the last layer. "Does it end?" she said. "The investigation?" "All of it." She looked at the window. 3 weeks ago, I was running a company I thought I understood. Now I'm finding out that the person I gave operational authority to spent 8 months dismantling it from the inside. 2 board members I've worked with for years were helping him, and there are security breaches I still haven't fully mapped. She wasn't asking for reassurance. Her voice was too flat and direct for that. She was saying a true thing out loud and letting it be true. "When does the list of things I didn't know stop getting longer?" "It stops when the investigation is complete," Nathan said. "And then it stays stopped, as long as you build the right systems going forward." That sounds like a sales pitch for my security consultant. It's accurate regardless. He looked at her. "The investigation will have an end. Investigations always do. The picture gets ugly before it gets clear, but it does get clear." She looked at him. "How do you know?" "Because I've seen the other kind. Operations that stay messy because no one wants to see the full picture. This isn't that. You want the full picture. That's the difference." She was quiet for a moment, then, "Dennis Cho gets a fair process. If he was pressured or exploited, I want that on the record on his side. I'll make sure Lyle understands the context." She nodded and reached for the logs again, and he understood he was dismissed, which was fine. He was nearly at the door when she said, "Nathan, the retainer starts covering a security review of our 2 satellite offices. I meant to put that in the original contract and forgot. Is that—" "Fine," he said. "Send me the addresses." "Priya will." He left. In the elevator down, he thought about what she'd said. When does the list of things I didn't know stop getting longer? And thought that it was a question he recognized, that he'd asked it himself once, about a different kind of list, and that the answer he'd arrived at was that the list didn't stop, you just got better at carrying it. He didn't think she needed to hear that yet. She'd get there on her own. But Marcus Hale's criminal case moved through the system with the particular speed of cases where the evidence is documented, the subject is cooperating, and multiple parties have strong incentive to resolve it before the press coverage compounds. He pled guilty to 6 counts of financial fraud and 2 counts of conspiracy in a proceeding that lasted 40 minutes and that Sienna did not attend, on the advice of Douglas Mercer, who told her there was nothing to be gained from being in that room that wasn't already documented in the court record. She took his word for it. Owen Baxter and Claudia Reis resigned their board seats the same week Marcus pled guilty, accompanied by statements from their attorneys that they had been unaware of the full scope of Marcus's plans, which was the kind of statement that was legally cautious and humanly unconvincing but served its purpose. The civil side of their involvement would take longer to resolve. Douglas was handling it. Russell Crane, the disbarred attorney who'd built the receivership framework, received a harsher outcome than Marcus. His cooperation had been less forthcoming and his legal structure had been more deliberately sophisticated. He was looking at a minimum of 4 years. His attorney was still negotiating. The 3 garage operatives who'd fled through the service alley were apprehended in stages. The first in Baltimore 6 days after the incident, the second in Phoenix 2 weeks later, and the third, the lead man, the one who'd raised the gun at Nathan, in a motel outside of Nashville on a Thursday night 6 weeks after the garage. Detective Lyle called Sienna directly when the last one was taken into custody, which Sienna would later tell Nathan was the moment she actually exhaled. Not when the injunction went through, not when Marcus pled, when the last man was off the street. Dennis Cho, as Nathan had assessed, had been targeted and financially pressured, not Marcus directly, but through Russell Crane's network, which had identified him as a low-wage employee with a sick parent and significant medical debt. He'd provided access credentials in exchange for $17,000 and hadn't understood what they would be used for until after the garage incident, at which point he'd been too frightened and compromised to come forward on his own. He cooperated fully with the investigation. His charges were reduced, and he was sentenced to 18 months probation. He did not return to Whitmore Global. Nathan had recommended, privately, to Sienna that the company connect him with a victims advocate program. She'd arranged it through HR without making it public, which was the kind of thing Nathan was learning she did. The right move, quietly, without needing anyone to observe her doing it. Somewhere in the 6th week after the garage, the work at Whitmore Global shifted from crisis management to something more like construction. The forensic accounting review was complete. The real financial picture was better than the falsified records had suggested. The company was not in distress, had not been in distress, and the Q4 position, while not strong, was navigable with the operational adjustments Sienna and Dr. Okafor were implementing. The lenders had been briefed, the debt covenants were being renegotiated from a position of documented good faith, and 2 institutional investors who'd been circling based on the false distress signals had backed away once the real numbers were published. Sienna rebuilt the executive team methodically. She was not fast about it, which Nathan observed and privately thought was the right instinct. She interviewed candidates herself, sat in on second-round conversations, asked questions that were less about credentials and more about how people handled being wrong. She made one hire that surprised the industry, promoting Priya's equivalent on the operations side, a 27-year-old logistics analyst named James Adu, to interim VP of Operations, bypassing several more senior candidates. When a board member asked her why, she said, "Because he told me 3 times in the last year about problems in the supply chain that Marcus was suppressing, and I didn't follow up on them, and that was my failure. He was right, and he kept saying it. That's who I want in the room." The board member had no response to that. Nathan watched all of this from the edge, present, observing, doing the specific work he'd been hired to do, which expanded naturally from the initial security audit into something more like a standing advisory function. He attended the weekly executive security briefing, which he'd established as a standing item, and gave Sienna a direct report every Friday afternoon. The reports were short and specific. Here's what's secure, here's what isn't yet, here's what I need from you. She read them and responded with the same directness. It was, he found, a functional working relationship, which was what he'd expected and what he wanted. What he hadn't entirely expected was the rest of it. It happened gradually, or it had been happening and he noticed it gradually, which was probably the more accurate description. Sienna had a habit of extending the Friday briefings by 15 or 20 minutes after the formal security items were covered. Not always intentionally. Sometimes she'd ask a follow-up question about a recommendation he'd made, and they'd end up in a conversation about the reasoning behind it, and then about the broader operational context, and then about something adjacent that wasn't strictly security at all. She was curious in a specific way, not performatively, not the kind of curiosity that was actually a display of intelligence, but the kind that meant she didn't stop asking questions when the obvious answers ran out. She'd asked him once, in the 7th week, about the satellite office review he'd completed in Portland. He'd given her the formal report. She'd read it and then said, "The section on the overnight physical security. You flagged it, but didn't recommend a fix. Why?" "Because the fix requires a budget conversation that should involve Gerald Park and Dr. Okafor. I can tell you what's wrong. How to prioritize it against 6 other things that are also wrong isn't my call." "What would you do if it were your call?" He'd looked at her. "Is that a hypothetical or a question?" "Question," she said. "I want to know how you think about priorities." He'd told her. They talked for 25 minutes about resource allocation and risk tolerance and the specific problem of building security systems in organizations where the internal culture hadn't caught up to the external threat profile. She'd pushed back on 2 of his points, and both pushbacks had been accurate, and he'd told her so directly, which seemed to catch her slightly off guard. Not the agreement, but the directness of it, the absence of the hedging she apparently received from most people who worked for her. "You don't soften things," she said. "No. Most people do. With me, specifically." "I know." He looked at her. "You're the CEO. People perform a version of their thinking for you that they think you want to hear. That's not useful." "It's very not useful," she agreed, with a feeling in her voice that suggested this was something she'd been thinking about for longer than the current conversation. "You hired me because I'm outside the structure," he said. "Using me as another person who manages what they say to you defeats the purpose." She was quiet for a moment. "Is that what you're telling me every Friday? An unmanaged version?" "As close as I can get." She'd looked at the window and then back. "Good," she said. "I need that." It was a simple exchange. Nathan had driven home afterward thinking about whether it was more than that, and arrived at the honest answer that he wasn't sure, and filed it in the category of things that didn't need immediate resolution. Maya met Sienna on a Saturday in October. It wasn't planned. Nathan had mentioned to Sienna during the Friday briefing that he was taking Maya to the waterfront park the following morning, a routine weekend thing, and Sienna had said she sometimes walked there on Saturday mornings. And neither of them had done anything with that information, except that when Nathan and Maya were at the north end of the park at 9:30 a.m., Sienna was there with a coffee cup and running shoes and the slightly uncertain look of someone who wasn't sure they'd made the right call showing up. Maya assessed her with the directness of an 8-year-old who had no investment in managing social impressions. "Are you the lady from Dad's work?" "I am," Sienna said. "I'm Sienna." "I'm Maya." She looked at the coffee. "Is that from the cart at the south entrance or the one on the street?" "The cart." "That one's better." Maya seemed satisfied with this alignment of judgment. "Do you like the water?" "I do." "Dad says it calms your nervous system," Maya said. "I don't know what that means, but I like looking at it too." Sienna glanced at Nathan, who was watching this with the particular attention of a parent monitoring a first meeting and finding it going in an unexpected but acceptable direction. "Your dad is pretty smart," Sienna said. "He's smart about some things," Maya said, with the measured fairness of a child who'd arrived at honest assessment. "He's not great at board games. He always forgets about the rule exceptions." "That's a specific critique." "We played Clue last Tuesday, and he accused the wrong person twice." "In my defense," Nathan said, "the evidence was ambiguous." "The evidence was on the table," Maya said. Sienna laughed. The genuine one, the unguarded version, the laugh he'd heard for the first time when he'd told her about Maya's career choices. Maya looked pleased with herself. They walked the north path together, Maya moving ahead and then circling back the way kids do when they're comfortable and interested in a place. Sienna and Nathan side by side at the slower adult pace. They talked about the park. Sienna knew its history, that it had been an industrial port before the city reclaimed it, and Maya was fascinated by this in the particular way she was fascinated by anything that involved something becoming something else. They talked about books because Sienna asked what Maya was reading, and Maya told her in the detailed, enthusiastic way she talked about things she cared about. and Sienna listened with the full attention she gave things she was genuinely interested in, which Maya could apparently recognize because she talked to Sienna the way she talked to adults she trusted. Nathan watched this from the side. He wasn't sure exactly what he felt about it. It was warm and slightly strange, and he didn't want to name it something it wasn't, so he let it be what it was, which was a Saturday morning at the waterfront park with his daughter and a person who had moved in the compressed and specific way that shared crisis sometimes moved people. From stranger to something that didn't have a clean word yet. When they reached the south end and the coffee cart, and Maya demanded a hot chocolate, Sienna bought it without asking Nathan, and Maya said thank you with genuine rather than performed politeness, and then ran ahead to look at the boats. Sienna started and seemed to run out of the word she was looking for. Yeah, Nathan said. Where's her mother? She said it carefully, not intrusively, the question of someone who wanted to understand rather than pry. She left when Maya was 2. Not dramatically. She was honest about it. She wasn't built for it. She's somewhere in the Pacific Northwest now. We don't have contact. He said it the way he'd learned to say it, directly, without the weight of unresolved anger, because the anger had been there and he'd worked through it because Maya needed him to. Maya knows what she knows. We don't pretend. Sienna was quiet. That's... She stopped again. Hard, he said. It was hard. It's manageable now. Maya seems... She's good, he said. She's genuinely good. Not good for a kid with an absent parent. Good. She's funny and sharp, and she gives things full attention. He watched his daughter interrogating a boat rental operator about the size classification of the vessels. I don't take credit for that. I think she was just built that way. You take some credit, Sienna said. Maybe a small amount. She sipped her coffee and looked at the water. I don't have anyone like that, she said. Not self-pityingly, with the same flat directness she applied to security briefings and forensic accounting reports. I've been running this company since I was 26, and I've been narrow. I think I became narrow without noticing. The company took up the space where other things were supposed to go. He looked at her. I'm not complaining, she said. I built something real. I'm proud of it. She watched a boat move out from the dock. I understand what you mean about choosing what to come home to. I just haven't had the thing to come home to yet. He didn't say anything. He thought there were about 4 things he could say, and all of them were either too much or not enough. So he let the moment be what it was, which was 2 people standing by the water being honest in the specific way that sometimes happens when the usual social architecture has been bypassed by shared experience. Maya came back with a list of questions about boat licensing and the feasibility of owning a personal watercraft in the city, and the morning moved on the way mornings do when they're good ones, slightly too fast. The water doing exactly what Nathan had told Maya it did. On the walk back to the parking area, Maya put her hand in Nathan's and said, without preamble, I like her. I know, Nathan said. Are you going to keep working for her? Yes. Good, Maya said. She asks good questions. Most grown-ups don't. He squeezed her hand and didn't say anything else, because there wasn't anything else necessary, and because some of the best moments in the life he'd built were exactly this size. Small, unhurried, and completely sufficient. Sienna walked to her car and turned once before she got in, and raised her coffee cup in a small, unelaborate gesture that was somewhere between a wave and a thank you, and he raised his hand back and Maya waved with both arms, which made Sienna smile. She drove away, and Nathan and Maya walked to their own car, and the Saturday settled into itself, ordinary and sufficient. Thoughts. The full security audit report landed on Sienna's desk on the last Thursday of October. 47 pages, every vulnerability mapped, every recommendation tiered by urgency and cost, every access point and protocol and staffing gap documented with the same specificity Nathan brought to everything. Gerald Park had reviewed it and called it the most thorough security assessment he'd seen in 20 years in the field, which he told Nathan directly and without obvious resentment, which Nathan took as a good sign about Gerald Park. Sienna read the whole thing the same day. She called Nathan at 5:30. There are 12 things on here that I should have had someone looking at 2 years ago, she said. Yes, you could have led with that. The point is to fix them, not to establish who should have caught them earlier. A short pause. You're diplomatic when it counts. I'm practical when it counts. Sometimes those overlap. She was quiet for a moment. The report recommends a restructuring of the security team's reporting line. Gerald Park should report to you directly, not through operations. The compromise was possible because Marcus's access to operations included security oversight. That structural problem is the root issue. I know. I read it. Another pause. It also recommends a security training program for executive staff. Every executive in this company makes decisions that affect physical and information security without basic threat literacy. That's a gap. Will you run it? He thought about Tuesday pickups and Wednesday dinners and Maya's ongoing assessment of which grown-ups asked good questions. I can design it and run the initial session, he said. After that, it should be embedded in the organization. You don't want it dependent on one external consultant. Noted. A pause slightly different from the others. Less professional, more like something she was deciding whether to say. Nathan. Yes. Thank you for the report for the last 6 weeks. She said it with the same directness she'd used in the garage maintenance corridor. No performance in it. I know this wasn't the quiet consulting work you had in mind when you agreed. It was what it needed to be, he said. Is it... She stopped, started again. Is it sustainable for you? With everything? He thought about it honestly. Yes, he said. I'd tell you if it wasn't. I know you would. And then, Maya said she wants to see the boats again. He hadn't expected that. When did she... She emailed me. Through my work address. She found it on the company website. He processed this. She emailed the CEO of a billion-dollar company to discuss boat scheduling. She did. She was very professional. She used a subject line. He was silent for a moment, caught somewhere between exasperation and something too close to laughter to entirely suppress. I'll talk to her about appropriate channels. Don't, Sienna said, and her voice was warm and unguarded in the way that the Saturday morning at the waterfront had been warm. She asked if we could go back when it's less cold. I said yes. He held the phone and let that sit for a moment. All right, he said finally. All right, she echoed. They said goodnight, and he set the phone on the kitchen counter, and Maya appeared from the hallway in her pajamas with the book about the spy grandmother and said, Can we read tonight? Yes, he said. Get the book. She got the book, and they sat on the couch in the ordinary light of an ordinary evening. And he read, and she listened, and neither of them needed anything more than exactly that. November came in cold and overcast, the way it always did in this city. Not dramatically, not with the sudden violence of a first frost, but gradually, the temperature dropping 2 degrees at a time, until one morning you walked outside and realized that summer had been gone for a while, and you just hadn't acknowledged it yet. Sienna noticed it on a Tuesday, standing at her office window with her second coffee of the morning, watching the people on the street below who had switched to heavier coats sometime in the last 2 weeks without her registering the change. She'd been inside a lot. That was not new. She'd always been an inside person, a building person, someone whose world organized itself around conference rooms and terminals and the specific artificial climate of a 42nd floor. But lately the inside felt less like a choice and more like a default she hadn't examined. She examined it now, briefly, and then Priya knocked and came in with the morning briefing, and the day began the way days did. The company was steadier. That was the honest word for it. Not healed, not transformed, but steadier. The way a person is steadier 6 months after a serious illness, still aware of the fragility but no longer ruled by it. Dr. Okafor had restructured the financial reporting framework from the ground up, building in triple redundancy checks that would make the kind of quiet manipulation Marcus had performed for 8 months essentially impossible going forward. The debt covenant renegotiation had concluded on terms that were not favorable in the way good terms were favorable, but were sustainable in the way honest terms were sustainable, which Sienna had decided to count as a win rather than a concession. James Adu, her 27-year-old interim VP of operations, had turned out to be exactly what she'd assessed him as. Someone who told her the truth without managing it, who had an instinct for operational problems that was better than anyone twice his age she'd worked with, and who was, as of the first week of November, no longer interim. She'd made the appointment permanent at the October board meeting, over the mild resistance of two board members who thought the title required someone with more gray hair, and she'd overridden them without apology. The board had gotten better at accepting that she didn't require consensus on decisions that were hers to make. Gerald Park's restructured security team had implemented 9 of the 12 priority recommendations from Nathan's report. The other 3 were in progress, delayed by budget timing rather than commitment. Nathan's weekly briefings had become the meeting Sienna consistently did not let Priya reschedule. Not because she'd announced that to anyone, but because it was true, and she'd stopped pretending it was purely about the security function. Marcus Hale was sentenced in late October. 7 years, with eligibility for reduction at 4 based on the cooperation agreement he'd honored. Sienna had not attended the sentencing. She'd followed it through Douglas Mercer's messages and had felt, when Douglas texted her the outcome, a flatness that was not satisfaction and not grief, but something in between. The feeling of a closed door in a hallway that still had other doors she hadn't figured out yet. She'd sat with that for an evening and then moved forward because that was what there was to do, and because she was, at her core, someone who moved forward. The building, once the site of the worst night of her professional life, was just a building again. She'd thought it might not recover that quality, that the garage would always have the particular weight of what had happened there. But buildings turn out to be more neutral than the things that happen inside them. She drove in through the underground entrance every morning. Sometimes she thought about it, and sometimes she didn't, and by November, she mostly didn't. The second Saturday in November, Nathan and Maya came back to the waterfront. It was colder than October had been. Properly cold, the water a darker gray, the tourist boats put away for the season, the cafe at the south end doing a steady business in hot drinks for the reduced population of people who showed up to parks in November, out of stubbornness or habit, or genuine preference for the way cold air moved off water. Sienna was there before them, which she'd told herself was because she lived closer and not because she'd been thinking about it since Wednesday, which was only partially true. Maya arrived wearing a coat that was slightly too big. She'd grown into it from last year's size, or it had been purchased for next year's size. Nathan's practical approach to children's clothing, and carrying a book in her outside pocket, the spine worn soft from reading. She stopped when she saw Sienna and said, "You wore better shoes." Sienna looked down. She'd worn flat boots instead of the running shoes she'd had on in October. "I learned." October was slippery near the south dock, Maya confirmed, as if presenting evidence. "The wood gets wet." "I remember." Good. Maya seemed satisfied with this demonstration of applied memory. She walked between us on the north path without being placed there, the natural positioning of a child who was comfortable with the people on either side, her book tucked against her chest. She talked about the boats that were gone for the season and asked Nathan whether they went somewhere warm, which he said he didn't know, and then asked Sienna, who said she thought some of them were stored in covered docks but wasn't sure about the larger ones. Maya decided this was unsatisfying and announced that she was going to research it, which both of them understood was not an idle statement. "She actually will," Nathan said when Maya had run ahead to examine something at the railing. "I know," Sienna said. "She emailed me a follow-up about the boats last week. She found an article about winter boat storage." He looked at her sideways. "You're corresponding with my 8-year-old. She initiates. I respond. That's correspondence." A pause. "She write as well. Her sentences are clean. She reads constantly. It goes in and comes back out." "Like you," Sienna said. He considered this. "I don't write emails to the CEOs of companies I've never met." "No, you show up in their parking garages at 11 at night and dismantle organized crime operations." "That was one time." "So far," she said, and he heard something in it that was both a joke and not entirely a joke, and he chose not to examine that immediately. Maya came back and inserted herself into the conversation to report that the railing had a loose bolt, and someone should tell the Parks Department, which Nathan agreed was reasonable, and which Sienna said she'd pass along to the city through the company's municipal liaison, which was a thing Sienna apparently had access to that most people didn't, and which Maya found appropriately impressive. They walked the full loop of the park, an hour and 15 minutes. The cold was honest and uncomplicated, and the water was doing what water did, which was whatever it wanted regardless of who was watching. And Sienna thought at one point, not sentimentally, just as an observation, that this was the most uncomplicated hour she'd had in a long time. Not because nothing was complicated in her life right now, but because the hour itself didn't require her to be anything other than a person walking around a park in cold weather with a man she trusted and a child she was starting to think about more than was strictly professional. In the third week of November, Nathan found the last piece. It was in the satellite office records from Portland, a shell company that had been receiving small monthly payments from a Whitmore Global operational budget line for 11 months. Disbursement small enough to fall below the automatic audit threshold, labeled as vendor maintenance fees. The shell company's registration traced, through 2 layers of inactive holding entities, to an address in Delaware that also served as the registered agent for 3 other companies, one of which had received a consulting payment from Russell Crane's legal practice 4 months before the garage incident. It was the funding mechanism, how Marcus had paid for the operation over time, siphoning money out of a low-scrutiny budget line in small increments that individually raised no flags and collectively added up to just under $200,000 over 11 months. Nathan brought it to Detective Lyle first because it was criminal evidence and the chain of custody mattered. Then he brought it to Douglas Mercer because it affected the civil recovery case. Then he brought it to Sienna because it was her company and she deserved to see the complete picture before it became part of someone else's filing. She read through the documentation at her desk without speaking. He sat across from her and waited. When she set it down, she looked at the ceiling for a moment. Not dramatically, just the specific look of someone absorbing a thing they'd known was probably coming and still finding it landing harder than expected. $200,000, she said. Over 11 months. Correct. He was sitting in my board meetings every week, reviewing quarterly numbers with me. He had lunch in this building on Fridays. She was not asking for anything from him. She was saying it out loud because saying things out loud was part of how she processed them. And she'd stopped performing composed professionalism for him in a way that he thought had happened gradually and without announcement. He looked me in the face and did this. Yes. Does it... She stopped, started again. Does it get less strange? Knowing that someone you worked with every day was operating on 2 tracks simultaneously? He was quiet for a moment. It gets less sharp, he said. The strangeness stays. You just stop expecting it to resolve into something that makes sense because it doesn't make sense, not in the way you want it to. She looked at him. Did that happen to you? In the military? In a different context, he said. Yes. She held his gaze for a moment, and he thought she was going to ask, and then she seemed to decide it wasn't the right time or the right room, and she looked back at the documentation. How does this affect the civil recovery case? Mercer says it strengthens it. The shell company structure establishes premeditation at a level that changes the damage calculation. How much? He estimates the civil judgment could recover up to 3 times the documented losses. He's filing an amended complaint next week. She was quiet. Does Lyle need anything else from you on the criminal side? She says the case is complete. This is the last piece. Everything is documented. Sienna put her hands flat on the desk, a gesture he'd come to recognize as her version of closing something, a physical period at the end of a sentence. Then it's over, she said, not triumphantly, with the particular flatness of someone who has been waiting for a finish line and found that finish lines feel less like victory and more like permission to stop running. The investigation is over, he said. The rest of it is legal process. That runs without you. I know. She looked at the window. November outside, the city doing what cities do, indifferent to the specific drama of any individual building's 42nd floor. I want to do something with it. With what? With what happened. With what I found out about the people in this building and who they were and what they were willing to do. She turned back to him. I'm not talking about revenge or punishment. That's handled. I mean the structural thing, the reason it was possible. Marcus was possible because this company had a culture that valued credentials over character, titles over integrity. He was possible because people below him saw things that were wrong and didn't have a safe way to say so. She said this like she'd been turning it over for weeks, which he thought she probably had. I want to build something that changes that. What does that look like? An ethics reporting structure that's genuinely independent, not HR, that's compromised by reporting lines. A separate channel, external ombudsman, protected status for anyone who uses it. She was thinking out loud in the direct way she thought out loud with him now, without managing the presentation of it. And a program, I've been talking to James and Adeyes about it, where we identify people in the company who've been doing the right thing without recognition and actually recognize them. Not a plaque on the wall program, something real. Development opportunities, compensation review, genuine acknowledgement. He looked at her. Dennis Cho was exploited because he had debt, and no one was paying attention to whether the people doing critical security work were financially stable enough not to be vulnerable, she said. That's a company failure. I want to fix it. That's a significant structural initiative. I have a company to run. Significant structural initiatives are the job. She met his eyes. Will you help design the security component? The part about protecting people who report integrity violations from retaliation? Yes, he said. Not as an add-on to your existing role, as a separate project with a separate scope and timeline. That affects the contract terms. Priya will send you a revised structure. He was quiet for a moment. You've been planning this for a while. Since the sentencing, she said. Maybe before that. She looked at the documentation on her desk, the last piece, the completed picture. Nathan, I have to tell you something that's going to sound strange coming from a CEO talking to her security consultant. He waited. I trust your judgment more than I trust most people's. Not just about security, about whether things are right, whether I'm thinking about something correctly. She said it without embarrassment, but with the careful precision of someone choosing exact words. I've been around a lot of smart people in this job, and I've been lonely in a specific way that I don't think is about being alone. I think it's about not having people around me who tell me the truth without managing it. She looked at him directly. You do that. He held her gaze. He was aware of several things simultaneously. The weight of what she was saying, the specific quality of trust that had built itself between them over 4 months without either of them directing it, and the equally specific awareness that he was a 38-year-old single father with a consulting contract and a quiet life he'd built deliberately out of the wreckage of a previous one, and that the distance between his life and hers was real and not decorative. Sienna, he said. I'm not asking you for anything, she said quickly, not defensively, clarifying. I'm telling you something true because I think you deserve to know it, because you've been honest with me for 4 months, and that deserves something back. He was quiet. You don't have to say anything, she said. I know, he said. And then, I trust your judgment too, for what it's worth. She looked at him for a moment, and he thought that whatever was in her face was not what she'd expected to feel, and also not what she'd expected him to say, and that those two things together had made the room slightly different than it had been 60 seconds ago. Okay, she said finally. Okay, he said. They returned to the documentation. December moved differently. The legal proceedings were in their final stages. Marcus's sentencing had been delivered. Crane's negotiated plea was complete. The civil case was filed and moving on its own timeline through the court system, generating paperwork and billings in the way civil cases did, slow and inevitable as weather. Sienna's attention shifted, genuinely and not just by choice, from the aftermath of crisis to the work of building something better than what had been there before. The ethics reporting structure launched in the first week of December. Douglas Mercer had helped design the Ombudsman component. Nathan had designed the security and confidentiality protocols. Priya had managed the internal rollout communication with the specific competence that made Sienna, in a private moment, revise Priya's compensation upward for the second time that year. But the program was not perfect. There were gaps and awkward seams, places where the design had run up against institutional resistance and been forced to compromise. But it was real, and it was more than had existed before, and that was the standard Sienna had decided to hold herself to. Better than before. Not perfect. Better. The employee recognition program launched the week after. James Adu had found 11 people in the company who had flagged operational problems in the past year that had been suppressed or ignored under Marcus's management. 11 people who had been right and unheard. Sienna met with each of them individually, not in groups, not through HR proxies, but herself, in her office, for 30 minutes each. She told them what she'd found. She told them they'd been right. She asked what they needed and listened to the answers. Several of them cried, which she hadn't been prepared for, but received with the directness she brought to things that surprised her. Two of them asked for lateral moves that their previous managers had blocked. She approved both before the meetings ended. She told Nathan about these meetings on a Friday afternoon, not in the formal briefing context, but after it had ended and neither of them had moved to leave. He listened and didn't say anything for a moment, and then said, "That mattered to them." "I know. Not the compensation review, the 30 minutes. She looked at him. "Yes," she said. "I know." He was quiet for a moment. "You're a different kind of CEO than you were 6 months ago." She considered this. "Is that a compliment?" "It's an observation," he said. "But yes." Christmas was 3 weeks away when Maya announced at dinner on a Wednesday that she had written Sienna a card. Nathan looked up from his plate. "What kind of card?" "A thank you card for taking us to the park and for emailing back about the boats." She was eating with the focused efficiency she brought to meals when she had something on her mind. "And for being nice." He thought about several responses and chose the most direct one. "That was thoughtful." "I used the card with the penguins on it. She seems like someone who would like penguins." "What makes you think that?" Maya considered. "She's serious most of the time, but then she laughs when something is actually funny. Penguins are serious, but also funny. It matches." He didn't have a response to the logic of that, because the logic was sound in the way 8-year-old logic sometimes was. "Did you seal it?" he asked. "Yes, I put a sticker on it too. A star." "I'll make sure she gets it." "You could give it to her yourself," Maya said, with the casual pragmatism of a child who has no investment in indirection. "When you go to work on Friday." "I could." Maya ate some more rice. "Do you like her?" He was quiet for a moment, in the way that requires a moment. "Yes," he said. "I do." "As a friend or as—" She stopped, and the pause was so uncharacteristically delicate for Maya that he looked at her. She was looking at her plate with the expression of someone choosing words with more care than usual. "As more than a friend." He was quiet. "Because it's okay if it's more than a friend," she said to her plate. "I don't mind. I just want to know." He looked at his daughter. 8 years old, slightly too big coat, book always nearby. The specific serious intelligence she'd carried since she could form sentences. The child who had been the reason he'd come home from every difficult thing and stayed home after the last one. He thought about what it meant that she was asking, and what it meant that she'd phrased it the way she had, "I don't mind," with the careful generosity of someone older than she was, and also just herself. "I don't know yet," he said honestly. "Some things take time to understand." Maya looked up. "That's a grown-up answer." "It's the true one." She thought about this. "Okay," she said, "but if you figure it out, you can tell me." "I will." "Okay." She went back to her dinner. "Can we have hot chocolate after?" "Yes," he said. "We can have hot chocolate after." Well, he gave Sienna the card on Friday. He didn't make a production of it. He set it on the conference table at the start of the briefing, Maya's handwriting on the front, the penguin card with the star sticker on the back. Sienna looked at it and then at him, and he said, "Maya wrote it. She wanted you to have it." Sienna picked it up and read it, and something happened in her face that she didn't manage or control. It came through directly, the way things do when they catch you before your defenses are in place. He watched her read it twice, because she did read it twice, and then she set it down carefully, with the precision of something being placed rather than put down. "She drew a boat on the inside," Sienna said. "She researched winter boat storage. She considers herself informed on the subject." Sienna looked at the card. "I'm going to keep this," she said, which was not a statement that required his response, but which he received anyway. The briefing went its usual 30 minutes, plus the additional 20 that it had settled into without either of them naming the pattern. They talked about the final phase of the satellite office security implementation, about the Ombudsman program's first 2 reports and what they indicated about usage, about a physical access protocol change Nathan was recommending for the parking structure that should have been implemented years ago. When they were done, neither of them moved to end the meeting. He thought about Maya's question as more than a friend, and about the honest answer he'd given her, which had been true at the time and which was somewhat less uncertain now than it had been 3 days ago, sitting across from a woman who had read his daughter's card twice and was keeping it. "The company is planning a small event," Sienna said, "in January. A recognition dinner for the employees from the program. Informal, not a gala, not a production, just a dinner." She looked at the table and then at him. "I'd like you to come. Not as security consultant, as someone who was part of why we're having it." He considered this. "Maya is invited too," she said, "if you want to bring her. James's wife is bringing their kids. It's that kind of dinner." He was quiet for a moment. "She'll have opinions about the menu." "I'm counting on it," Sienna said, and the warmth in her voice was the unguarded version, the one he'd heard at the waterfront and occasionally in this room when the professional register dropped, and she was just a person talking to another person. "We'll be there," he said. She nodded. And then, because she was someone who said true things when they were true and didn't hold them back until they became something larger and harder to say, "I'm glad you answered the phone that night, when your agency called about the temporary driver position." He looked at her. "Me too." It was a simple exchange, the same size as the important ones tended to be. Not everything needed to be large to be significant. He'd learned that in the Navy and relearned it in the years after, sitting on the edge of Maya's bed at night, reading about spy grandmothers and race car drivers and marine biologists, understanding that the things that held a life together were usually small and repeated and quiet. January came. The recognition dinner was on the 14th, a Thursday, held at a restaurant 3 blocks from the Whitmore Global building. Not the kind of restaurant where you felt watched, but the kind where the tables were close enough together that the room felt warm, where the noise level was comfortable rather than oppressive, where 11 people who had been right about things that mattered sat down to a meal that acknowledged that fact. Sienna had written each of them a letter. Not an email, a letter, physical, specific to each person and what they'd contributed. She'd given them out before dinner and said nothing else about it, which was the right decision in the way right decisions often were, self-evident once made, something you wondered why you'd had to decide at all. Nathan sat between Maya and Dr. Okafor, who turned out to share Maya's interest in marine biology from a quantitative modeling perspective, which Maya found impressive, and which generated a conversation that lasted through 2 courses and was still going when the dessert arrived. He watched the room from the comfortable vantage of someone present in it, rather than assessing it, which was a distinction he hadn't fully appreciated until he was living on the right side of it. Sienna moved through the dinner the way she moved through most things, with attention, not performance. He watched her talk to each person, watched her listen, watched her laugh when something was actually funny, which Maya had identified correctly as a marker of a specific kind of character. She caught him watching once and held his gaze for a moment and then smiled the unguarded version, the waterfront one, and went back to her conversation. After dinner, walking to the cars in the cold January night, Maya held Nathan's hand and walked on his left while Sienna walked on his right. The street was quiet, the kind of quiet that late evenings in cold months produced. Not empty, just settled, the city doing its overnight work at a lower register. "The dessert was good," Maya said. "The chocolate one." "It was," Sienna agreed. "Better than the granola bar." Nathan looked at her. "What granola bar?" "The one on the security desk." "On the binder." Maya looked up at Sienna. "You told me about it. In your email. You said there was a granola bar on a binder that someone had left, and it made you feel like the room was human." Sienna looked at Nathan, and he saw something in her expression that was complicated and simple at the same time. The look of someone realizing that a detail they'd shared in a different context had been received and kept by someone small and attentive and completely unselfconscious about caring. "That's right," Sienna said. "That's exactly what it did." "I think the granola bar person just forgot it," Maya said, with the practical certainty of an 8-year-old closing a philosophical question. But it worked out. They reached the cars. Maya climbed into the back seat and pulled out her book with the automatic reach of a child for whom reading was as natural as breathing. Sienna stood outside her own car, keys in hand, the cold air doing what cold air did, and looked at Nathan. "Thursday?" she said. The briefing. "Thursday. he confirmed. She nodded and got in her car and drove away, the taillights disappearing around the corner, and Nathan got in his own car and started the engine and let it warm up the way older cars needed a moment. "Dad?" Maya said from the back seat. "Yeah." "Did you figure it out?" He looked at her in the rearview mirror. She was looking at him over the top of her book, patient and direct, giving him time. He thought about a parking garage at 11 at night and a woman who made up lies about security systems to buy 30 seconds of time. He thought about a first aid kit in a forgotten security office and a maintenance corridor and the specific smell of recycled air and old concrete. He thought about a Saturday morning at the waterfront and penguin cards, and the way some people told the truth without managing it, and how rare that actually was. He thought about what it meant to build something deliberately from pieces of a life, the way you rebuilt anything, not to what it was before, but to what it could be now, with the knowledge you'd earned and the people you'd found, and the choices you kept making every ordinary day. "Yeah," he said. "I think I did." Maya went back to her book. He pulled out of the parking space and drove home through the quiet January streets, and the city moved past the windows the way it always did, unaware of any individual story happening inside it, indifferent, full of its own motion, and he didn't need it to notice. Some things were not for the city. Some things were just for the people in the car. The heater came up. Maya turned a page. Outside, the first light snow of the year had started coming down, quiet and without announcement, settling on everything equally. The buildings and the streets and the parked cars and the bare branches of the trees along the median, the way the best things sometimes arrived, without drama, without ceremony, just present. When you looked up, already there. He drove, and she read, and the snow kept falling, and it was enough. It was without question or condition, enough.